Welcome back to the Optimize You podcast, the place where we're helping you optimize looking and feeling your best. If you enjoy the show, be sure to share it with a friend, like, and subscribe. And let's get into today's podcast. Today, we are going over the basics, bare bones, fundamentals on how to figure out your macros. Maybe even if you're firstly getting introduced to what macros even are, this would be a great episode for you. I'm going to keep it short, concise, straight to the point. Of course, we can dive down a ton of different rabbit holes on this topic, but I'm approaching today's topic from the point of view of you're brand new to this. You're just trying to figure out the nutrition side of things. Let's assume that you have the workouts or you have some sort of exercise routine that you're in. You just haven't figured out the nutrition side. You know that you need to figure out the macros thing and understand a little bit more awareness around your nutrition because that's where the results really lie. So let's start off by, first of all, what are macros? Let's give a broad overview. Macros is just short for macronutrients. Okay, so it's a short terminology, and it's broken down and comprised of fats, carbohydrates, and protein, which make up your total calories that you consume in a day. There's arguably a fourth one, which is alcohol, which is its own. We're not going to talk about that. That'll be for a different video. But macros in themselves comprise of the total caloric intake. So when combined, the amount of food that you eat in a day right now currently is broken down into carbohydrates, fats, and protein. And whether your awareness around your intake is there or not right now, that's essentially what makes up the amount of food that you're consuming on a day-to-day basis. Now, the total quantity is up to each individual. So if you need to, or you are trying to establish, and let's say, for example, your goal is either to gain weight, to lose weight, to do some sort of maintenance, or you want a body recomposition, right? You want to lower your body fat percentage and you want to increase your muscle, which is what I specifically specialize in with my clients. But let's just say that that is basically your goal because it's the one that I know the most about. Well, the first thing that you need to do is, first of all, figure out how many calories you're currently consuming right now. A great way to look at this is how much food and how much fuel, or in another case, how much gas, right? How much energy, because that's all calories are, they're energy. How much food does my body demand currently, and how much am I currently feeding it? So that's first and foremost. So when anybody's trying to go through, let's say they want to lower their body fat percentage and they want to increase their muscle, you always need to figure out a starting point. It's ideal to figure out that current starting point. Where are you at right now? What are the habits that you've been doing up until this point to establish your current body, your current existence right now, your current body metrics, right? Your amount of muscle that you have, the amount of body fat that you have, your body weight, all of those things. Your current state is going to be dictated by what you've done up until this point right now. So in order to find a starting point going forward, we need to figure out where you've been. So what I recommend everybody to do is for the next 7 days, and the reason I say 7 is so that you're also including weekends, track and log your food. So if you haven't before, you can use a free app called MyFitnessPal. You don't have to do the paid version. You just need some sort of food logging. If you're old school, you like to use just pen and paper and you want to use a notepad, that works as well. You can just literally hand write it down and then add and tally up your total calories for the day. Totally fine. Even just ballparking this, right? You need to find a range. You need to figure out currently what you're consuming so that you can figure out whether you're under eating, you're eating somewhere in the ballpark, or you're overeating, right? You're in one of those three categories. You got to figure out which one you're in. Once you've established that, let's say you've eaten for 7 days, you have your totals and you're in a position where you're like, okay, this is the amount of calories that I'm eating. You would add up all 7 days and then you would divide by 7. So add your total calories up consumed for the last 7 days straight, divide that by 7, and you're going to get an average, right? That number is going to be your average daily intake. And that number is really important because that's how many calories you consume on average, right? On a daily basis to get your current status, your current circumstance that you have right now. Height, weight, percentage, body fat, etc. I should have prefaced it with this, that when you track and log these next 7 days, it's really important to not change anything. So don't change the way you eat. Don't all of a sudden increase your eating habits and the quality of the food that you're consuming. It's really important to keep everything like your normal standard week. So if you include alcohol in there, if you include going out on the weekends, if you include date nights, like all those things, they need to stay similar. They need to stay fairly the same so that you can give yourself an accurate representation of how much food and how much fuel your body's really consuming up until this point. So that's first and foremost. So step number one, log your next 7 days, add each calorie day up, and then divide by 7. That'll give you your average of what you're currently taking. Now, once you have that number, now we can take our total calories and we can start to pay attention to the breakdown of those calories, right? So the amount of calories, if you're in a surplus, that's going to determine whether you gain weight. If you're right at your maintenance, obviously you're going to sustain. And then if you put yourself in a caloric deficit, meaning you're going to be burning more calories than what you're consuming, that's a caloric deficit, you'll lose weight. Now, how your body looks will determine how you choose to break down your macros, right? So your calories determine whether you gain weight, lose weight, or stay the same. The composition of that and how your body will look and how it will physically be, the amount of muscle you have of that weight, how much percentage of body fat is that going to be? That's going to come down to your macronutrient breakdown. So how many calories you're consuming, how many carbs, fats, and proteins specifically. So after you have that total caloric intake, and let's say your goal is to body recomposition, lose body fat, and increase muscle. I'm just going to go with that one because that's what most people want to do that come and talk specifically to me. Now, your next step is to, of those calories that you're consuming with your average, if that number is a number that you feel comfortable with and it's an easy number for you to eat, I'm going to challenge you to increase the number to essentially the easiest way to put this is how many calories can you currently consume and sustain your current status, your same body fat percentage within a few pounds, right? So it's okay to have some fluctuation. That's normal fluctuation within a handful of pounds, like within say 4 to 6 pounds, right? And that's just a generalization, but you don't want to have a huge weight fluctuation. So can you consume more food and stay within the same range, right? And what I mean by that is like, let's say hypothetically, your average caloric intake worked out to be 2,000 calories. Well, could you eat 2,200 calories and still sustain the same body, right? Fairly similar with that, with very minimal fluctuation. You can? Okay, cool. What about 2,400? What about 2,600? What about 2,800? What about 3,000 calories? What if you could eat 3,000 calories and stay at or around the same body weight within a couple pounds? Then that just means that you are under eating. And so you have to figure out that number. You have to test your body. You have to, because you'd be surprised. A lot of people tell me that they eat a lot and then we tally up how much they eat in a day. Like I eat a pizza. After that whole pizza, I have some ice cream and maybe I have a snack. It's like, okay, that puts you at about 1,500 calories and you're a 200 plus pound male. You're probably under eating, even though it doesn't feel like it. So in order to do that, gradually increase your calories from where you're currently at, just so that you can see, okay, what truly is my maintenance right now? What's the maximum amount of calories that I can actually eat without gaining weight? And once you figure out that number, now you got a really solid starting position. Let's just say hypothetically your average was 2,000. You're able to boost your calories up for, let's say, 4 to 5 weeks, and you worked them up to 2,400 calories. And you were literally at the same exact amount of body weight that you were the previous 4 weeks. So now you're consuming 2,400 calories versus when you were consuming only 2,000 calories, and you maintain the same exact body weight as you did 4 weeks ago, right? Eating now 400 more calories per day across 7, that's an extra 2,800 calories per week, right? So, or excuse me, 28,000 calories. Am I doing that math right? Let me see. So I just want to double check real quick. So if I'm eating an extra, let's say our original was 200, we're eating 400 times 7. Yeah, it's an extra 2,800 calories per week, right? So per day would be an additional 400. And so now I have that number and I've done that data, I've crunched that math and going, okay, I actually was able to increase my calories by 400 per day, 2,800 across the week. And so now I'm in a really good position. I feel good. I have a little bit more energy. I've focused on changing out the quality of food. Now my goal is to put myself into a caloric deficit, right? So generally speaking, you want to take yourself about 15 to 20% of whatever that total number is. So in this case, we were looking at 2,400 calories, right? I have my calculator here. 2,400 calories times, let's say 15% would be 360. off of that 2,400 calories, that'd put us roughly at about 2,000 calories, right? Like, so 2,040 to be exact. Let's just say 2,000 for the sake of argument. So now, once my body's been used to that 2,400 calories, and I've been there for a while, my energy levels are good. I haven't fluctuated a crazy amount of weight. I actually stayed the same. I just gave myself more fuel and more food, and I maximized that. And I really established how many calories I can eat and maintain the same body metrics, right? Like, okay, great. So I was under eating by 400 calories per day. And again, remember, I'm using this as an example. Or our example person could be called Jimmy, right? Jimmy is now able to increase from 2,000 to 2,400 calories. Cool. We got that number. That's our maintenance. That's our starting number. Jimmy's goal is to body recomp. So he wants to lose body fat and he wants to gain muscle. Well, it's inevitable that when you put yourself in a caloric deficit, right, you are now pulling your calories down and your energy expenditure exceeds that, which would then technically put you in a caloric deficit, that it's inevitable that you're going to lose some muscle tissue, some lean body mass. Our goal when we put ourselves into a caloric deficit is to maintain as much lean body mass, as much muscle tissue as possible. And in order to do that, we focus on the first macronutrient, which is going to be protein. Why protein? Because if you're not consuming an adequate enough amount of protein when you go into a caloric deficit, not only will you lose some lean body mass, you'll lose a lot of lean body mass. So the scale might move a lot faster. But remember, let's not equate weight loss with fat loss. Those are two totally different things. So if the goal is fat loss, remember, that's our body recomposition. We want to gain and increase muscle. And in this case, we're going into a caloric deficit. So we want to sustain as much muscle as possible. Cool. So in order to do that, we need to put ourselves and adhere to a protein target specifically. So let's say we're at our 2,400 calories. Of those calories, let's say our Jimmy is 200 pounds. A good goal or starting goal is to go anywhere from 0.6 and then on the high end, 1.2 grams per pound of body weight, right? So let's, for the sake of argument, let's just say one gram per pound of body weight for simple math is 200, right? So 200 grams of protein consumed in the 2,400 calories is what I would have Jimmy starting out at. Okay. And then we could fill the rest of carbohydrates and fats behind that, because the data and the research is very obvious. It points to whether you're a high carbohydrate diet or a low carbohydrate diet or a high fat diet or low fat diet, as long as calories and protein were equated in both groups in the studies, the changes were very small, very minimal, right? So really we want to focus on the things that are going to matter the most. That's why I'm really trying to trim the fat in this video, give you guys the most important things, right? So total calories, we need to establish that maintenance. We need to bump up our calories as high as we can without seeing any huge weight fluctuations, maintaining around the same metrics. Once we have that number, let's establish a protein target. So in this case, Jimmy is 200 pounds, anywhere from 0.6 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight. Or if you're really obese, and you're heavier and you got a lot of weight to lose, you're looking at 40, 50, 60 plus pounds of body fat to lose, then you can go by goal body weight, right? Because say, for example, let's say Jimmy had 30% body fat, 35% body fat. He's a 200 plus pound male and he's consuming 2,400 calories. Well, in order for him to hit his targets, his numbers are going to be a little skewed, right? They're going to be a little crazy. So, or let's take an even heavier example. Let's say Jimmy was 300 pounds, right? And he's consuming 2,400 calories. Well, in order for him to match the metrics that I said before with protein, let's just say 1 gram per pound of body weight, that means he'd have to take in 300 grams of protein, which is kind of a lot, right? So that's very hard to do. So if that's the case and you have a lot of body fat percentage or you're very obese, that's okay. Just take you can either go on the low end at 0.6 grams per pound of body weight, or you can take your target weight, right? You could do that as well. Or if you've got a scan, you could take your lean body mass and you can go based off that as well. But just to keep it simple, don't worry about that. Let's just go 200 pound male. Let's just say roughly 20 to 25% body fat. We'll say 20 for the sake of argument. So we're going to say, okay, we don't have a ton to lose, but we do want to go through a pretty solid fat loss and muscle gain, body recomposition. So we're going to stick to that 200 just for the sake of argument, right? 200 grams of protein. We got 2,400 calories. and we're going to fill the rest with our carbohydrates and fats. So if you're wondering how much carbs and fats you should take after you've established your calories and your protein, what I would focus on is seeing how well your body does with the majority or the remainder of your food intake, filling it up with carbohydrates, right? So that might look like, let's say, 35% of your diet is protein, the other 35% is carbohydrate, and the remaining is fat. And you find that running that for a couple weeks, you're like, man, you know what? I actually feel okay. My energy levels have gone up, but I'm going to test it and see if I can go a little bit higher. So then you keep your calories the same, your protein the same, but this time you bump your carbohydrates up to about 40% of your intake. And then you notice like, man, I actually feel phenomenal. The rest is going to be fats. You could do that as well. So you can see how each individual is going to be slightly different depending on their goals, depending on their body composition, depending on a lot of different factors, right? So really all I want you to do for this video when we're talking macros is focus on your calories and your protein and then fill in the rest and pay attention to how you feel. So if you don't feel good with higher amounts of carbohydrate and you're like, man, I feel really bloated, right? That's a common theme that I see as well. Then flip-flop the two, then increase your fats, decrease your carbohydrates, but still keep your calories and your protein the same. And then that way you can really figure out what works best for you. So that's one of the easiest ways to do it, is to figure out your total calories through increasing, after you do your 7 days, increase those amount of calories to see if you can sustain the same body metrics that you currently have, but see if you can actually do so eating more food, right? Maybe boosting your calories up. Figure out what the maximum amount of calories and food that you can eat while sustaining your same current body metrics, your same current status, right? A couple pound fluctuation is fine, but we don't want to see a huge like 10, 12 pound fluctuation, 8-pound fluctuation, right? A couple pounds here and there is fine as you gradually increase calories over the weeks to come. You've established that number. For our example, we said Jimmy built up to 2,400 calories. He started at 2,000. From his 2,400, he established a protein target. In this case, simple math, we did 1 grams per pound of body weight. Jimmy weighs 200 pounds. So we have 2,400 calories, 200 grams of which is protein. And then Jimmy's going to fill in the rest with carbohydrates and fats based on how he feels. If he likes carbohydrates, he's going to have more carbs than fat. If he likes fats more, then he might have some higher fats in his diet. He's going to experiment with how he feels. But the thing that's going to remain the same is his caloric intake at 2,400 and his 200 grams of protein. Those will stay his staples. The other two will be variables that he can manipulate based on how he feels through trial and error. Okay, now from that 2,400 calories, Jimmy has been there for a few weeks. He feels good. He feels amazing. Remember, his ultimate goals are to lose body fat. So what he's going to do is put himself into a caloric deficit. In this case, he's going to go about 15 to 20% from that 2,400 calories, which would put him just over 2,000 calories. So for the sake of argument, we'll put him back into 2,000 calories. But this time, he's been so used to being at that 2,400 calories that he's able to put himself into a caloric deficit because his body's been so adapted to the higher amount of calories with very little, if any, body fluctuations. He may even in some cases lose weight despite increasing calories, which is a good problem to have. But now he's put himself in a caloric deficit by consuming 2,000 calories. He's still at that 200 grams of protein, which is really important because remember, when we put ourselves in a caloric deficit, it's inevitable that we are going to lose some lean body mass. We want to sustain as much muscle as possible. We also want to help stay satiated at a lower amount of calorie intake by consuming an adequate amount of protein, right? So protein is going to be your best friend in this process, and then we're going to fill the rest with carbohydrates and fats depending on how we feel. So that's a great starting point. Again, that was an example that I used for Jimmy, but you can build in your metrics in there and follow through that same exact protocol, and that will get you on track with the best starting steps. Now, of course, there's a lot of steps that come after that, but this video was based on how to get you started to establish your caloric intake, on how to find your maintenance, how to strategically take yourself into a calorie deficit so you can begin losing body fat and doing so strategically, accurately, and confidently. So that's what I wanted to do on this video. I don't want to make this video super long because you can go in so many different details. That's why I just wanted to share the example of Jimmy. We'll reiterate the steps one last time here. So Jimmy is coming to the table here. He's a 200-pound male. He's currently consuming 2,000 calories. He wants to figure out his macros. So the first thing he does is track. He doesn't change anything for the next 7 days, and he logs his foods for 7 days. He has calories for the previous 7 days. He's going to add all of them up, divide by 7. That is going to be his current number that he has been consuming on average to have and yield his current circumstance of 200 pounds. Now, we want to challenge that and see if he can consume more food and more fuel with little to no fluctuation at all. So, meaning we're not increasing our body fat. We might see a couple pound fluctuation. That's okay. Remember, fluctuation in scale doesn't directly correlate or equate to body fat increase. We want to pay attention to energy levels. So in this case, our example that we used, Jimmy was able to increase gradually, let's say 100 calories per week or biweekly, until eventually he was sustaining at 2,400 calories. He noticed when he went over that, he gained a little bit too much weight. So he came back down to 2,400, found the sweet spot. So that's his true maintenance. That's where he feels good at. That's where he had higher energy levels. So he was actually under eating a little bit based on the activity and energy expenditure that he was currently doing. So now he's established 2,400 calories as his maintenance. The next step was to figure out how much protein he's consuming. In this case, in this example, we kept it easy at 1 gram per pound of body weight. Remember, you can go anywhere from 0.6 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight. Or if you're very obese, remember, just use your lean body mass or your goal body weight is another great option to do. And then the rest, Jimmy's going to fill with carbohydrates and fats based on how he feels. If he likes the higher energy levels off having more carbohydrate, he'll probably stick with that. If he feels a little bit bloated, doesn't like the carbohydrate, he'll pull those down and then increase the fats just to fill the remaining amount of calories after already 200 grams have been consumed, and sticking to that 2,000 calorie mark now because he's putting himself in a deficit. So remember, 15 to 20% deficit can, in this case, it dropped Jimmy down from 2,400 calories down to 2,000. He's focused on that 200 grams of protein, and he's just backfilling his carbohydrates and fats based on how he feels and how his body's responding. So hopefully that shed some insight on where to give you a great starting point to help you with your body recomposition, to make sure you got an adequate amount of protein, you're getting enough fuel in your body to make sure that you're lifting and utilizing that energy to your advantage so you can really capitalize on your process and have some fun. Of course, there's so many different nuances and one-offs and unique scenarios that will happen, but that's hopefully that general example of Jimmy that I used help paint a picture on how you can go step by step and get your 7-day average, establish a true maintenance of that maintenance, figure out your protein target, and then fill in the carbohydrates and fats based on experimentation, adjustments as you go. So hopefully that was helpful. If that was helpful for you, make sure to give it a share, a like, share it with a family member, a friend, anybody you feel like could benefit from it. If you guys like this video and you want to see more in-depth videos or next steps in these scenarios, and we can continue to use Jimmy as an example, let us know. We'd be more than happy to do it. And we will catch you guys on the next one.